Why is it that the moment you taste victory, the battle suddenly feels harder than ever? You've prayed, you've fought through doubt, you've overcome, and just when you think you can finally breathe, the weight of temptation, discouragement, or fear slams into you. It feels unfair, almost like you're being ambushed. But what if that's not random? What if that timing is intentional? Think about it. After climbing a mountain, your guard drops. You're exhausted. You assume the hardest part is over. That's exactly when the enemy moves in. Not when you're armored up for war, but when you're least expecting another fight. It's a strategy as old as time itself, and it's one of the reasons so many people stumble right after their greatest moments of faith. But here's the truth. If you understand the why, you'll see the attack differently. You'll realize it's not the end of your victory, but the confirmation of it. And if you know how to respond, you won't just survive these strikes, you'll come out stronger. Stick with me to the end, because I'll show you not only why this happens, but how you can guard yourself and turn the enemy's attack into your next breakthrough. Victory invites attack, but you don't have to fall. Discover 7 biblical secrets to destroy lust before it destroys you. Grab your copy in the description and start fighting back today. Have you ever noticed how the moments right after a breakthrough often feel the most fragile? You've just experienced a victory that should have lifted you higher, but instead something shifts. Doubt creeps in, temptations feel stronger, and your mind starts playing games you thought you already conquered. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. The enemy rarely wastes his arrows when you're already on the ground. He aims for the moment you're standing tall, celebrating, and least prepared for another battle. It's the subtle whisper after the prayer you thought was answered. It's the wave of discouragement after the sermon that lit your soul on fire. It's the heavy emptiness that hits the morning after you felt closest to God. That pattern isn't random, it's intentional, because victory exposes you and exposure makes you a target. Think of it this way. When you climb to a peak, the air gets thinner, your body weaker, and your energy drained. You've made it to the top, but that's also where you're most vulnerable. Spiritually, it's no different. The mountaintop moments of faith are breathtaking, but they leave you winded. And when you're winded, you don't fight with the same sharpness you did at the start. That's when the strike lands. Not because you're failing, but because you're succeeding. The enemy doesn't pick fights with those who aren't moving forward. He saves his fiercest blows for those who are making progress, those whose steps threaten his grip. And that's why you feel blindsided right after seasons of growth. It's not just fatigue, it's warfare. Now here's the catch. When people don't recognize the pattern, they mistake the attack for failure. They think, if I'm struggling this much, maybe I never really won. But that's the lie. Struggle after victory doesn't erase the victory, it proves it happened. A thief doesn't break into empty houses. Resistance comes because there's something valuable worth stealing. This is why so many spiritual collapses happen right after mountaintop experiences. People step out of the fight believing the win is final, only to discover the war isn't over. They let their guard down, and what should have been a stepping stone becomes a stumbling block. But when you see the pattern for what it really is, you don't just prepare for the attack, you learn to expect it. And that changes everything. Imagine the difference between being surprised by an ambush and being ready for it. One leaves you broken, wondering what went wrong. The other leaves you standing bruised maybe, but unshaken because you saw it coming. That's the power of awareness. Once you know the enemy's rhythm, his strategy loses its edge. The truth is, these attacks are less about your weakness and more about your impact. If your victory didn't matter, it wouldn't be challenged. The fact that it's followed by resistance is proof you've shaken something in the unseen. That's not something to fear, it's something to recognize and prepare for. Because the very pressure that feels like it's crushing you is also shaping you into someone stronger, sharper, and harder to defeat the next time. So when you're tempted to think, why am I struggling again? Didn't I just win this battle? Remember this, the attack isn't a sign of defeat. It's confirmation that you're dangerous to the enemy. And if you hold steady, if you don't let the strike undo the progress, that attack will end up being the very thing that proves your victory wasn't just a moment, it was the beginning of a transformation. Have you ever noticed how the fiercest blows often come right after your greatest breakthroughs? It's no coincidence. The enemy waits for the moment when the armor slips, when confidence turns into complacency, and when strength begins to fade. It's not just an attack, it's strategy. Think about what happens after a victory. There's relief, a sense of accomplishment, maybe even a touch of pride. The mind says, finally I made it through, I can rest now. And it's in that very moment of rest that vulnerability creeps in. When the adrenaline of the fight fades, your guard drops. You don't expect another strike because in your mind the battle was already won. But that's exactly the moment Satan chooses to advance. Victory often leaves you drained. You've prayed intensely, you've pushed through trials, and your spirit has poured itself out. It's like finishing a marathon. You may have crossed the finish line, but your body is trembling, your energy spent, That exhaustion creates an opening. It's not weakness in the sense of defeat. It's the simple reality that no one can fight endlessly without recharging. And if you don't recognize that truth, you'll mistake the sudden pressure afterward as failure rather than the predictable aftermath of spiritual exertion. Another reason the timing is so critical is pride. Spiritual wins can easily be twisted into ego boosts. You might not even notice it, but pride whispers, "Look what I did." The focus shifts from God's power to your own effort. And when that shift happens, the enemy doesn't need to tear down your faith. He just needs to nudge you further into self-reliance. That subtle pride makes you blind to danger and deaf to warnings. There's also the trap of assuming the battle is over. You defeat temptation once, you experience a powerful moment in prayer, or you see God move in your life and you assume the enemy will back off for a while. But Satan doesn't surrender because you've had a victory. He intensifies. Why? Because he knows momentum matters. A single victory can ignite your faith. But if he can cut you down immediately afterward, he can replace momentum with discouragement. What was meant to propel you forward suddenly becomes fuel for doubt. Maybe that victory wasn't real. Maybe I'm not as strong as I thought. That timing has a psychological weight. Imagine standing tall on a mountaintop, only to be shoved the moment you look away from your footing. The fall feels sharper because the height was greater. In the same way, falling after a spiritual high feels heavier. It hits harder because the contrast is so intense. Satan counts on that contrast to magnify despair. But here's the key. Understanding this timing changes how you interpret the struggle. Instead of being blindsided and questioning your faith, you recognize the tactic. You see the attack for what it is, proof that your victory mattered, that it rattled the enemy, and that he's desperate to stop what God has started in you. That shift in perspective keeps you from spiraling into guilt or confusion. The timing matters because it's designed to rob you of momentum. If you allow discouragement to take root right after a breakthrough, you won't build on the victory, you'll bury it under fear and shame. But if you anticipate the attack, if you walk into your victories knowing that resistance is likely to follow, then you don't crumble when it comes. Instead, you're prepared. And preparation is everything. When you finish a battle, you don't just collapse, you rest with intention. You don't just celebrate, you stay watchful. You don't just rejoice in your strength, you remind yourself who gave you that strength. The timing of the enemy's strike doesn't have to catch you off guard. In fact, it can become a signal. If he's attacking me now, it's because something powerful has already been set in motion. It's easy to believe that the struggles we face after a spiritual breakthrough are unique to us, but they're not. Even the greatest men and women in Scripture walked through this exact cycle, and their stories reveal something critical. Victory doesn't mean the war is over. It often means the battle has just shifted to a new level. Take Jesus, for example. Right after his baptism, an incredible moment where the heavens opened, the Spirit descended, and the Father declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." He was led into the wilderness, 40 days of fasting, hunger, weakness, and in that moment of exhaustion, Satan appeared. Notice the timing. Not before the baptism, not before the declaration of identity, but right after. Satan targeted him when he should have been celebrating, because spiritual highs attract spiritual opposition. That's the enemy's strategy. If he can corrupt the victory early, he can crush the momentum before it multiplies. Now look at Elijah. He called down fire from heaven, shamed hundreds of false prophets, and witnessed God's undeniable power in front of an entire nation. That should have been the pinnacle of confidence and joy. Yet only a short time later, Elijah found himself in the wilderness, broken, afraid, and asking God to take his life. How can someone move from spiritual triumph to despair so quickly? Because great victories drain you. They cost energy, focus, and faith. And when your spirit is tired, Satan whispers lies louder. Elijah wasn't weak in faith. He was weary from the fight. The lesson here is that victory can leave you vulnerable if you don't restore what's been poured out. Israel's story paints the same picture on a larger scale. Time and again, after miraculous deliverances, the people fell into grumbling, fear, or rebellion. After crossing the Red Sea, they complained of hunger and thirst. After entering the Promised Land, they fell into cycles of idolatry. Their victories were real, but their guard dropped quickly, and the enemy exploited their short memory. Instead of building on victory, they slipped back into bondage. It shows us that remembering God's faithfulness is not optional, it's essential. Forgetting his victories makes us easy prey for discouragement. These examples remind us of something powerful. The enemy doesn't waste his time attacking what isn't moving forward. He targeted Jesus, Elijah, and Israel precisely because they were on the front lines of God's work. Their victories marked them as threats, and the closer they were to God's plan, the harder the attacks became. That's why experiencing resistance after breakthrough isn't proof of weakness. It's confirmation that your faith is shaking the kingdom of darkness. But here's the hopeful part. None of these stories end with defeat. Jesus resisted the enemy with the word and left the wilderness empowered for ministry. Elijah, though broken, was met by God with a whisper and renewed strength. Israel, despite countless failures, was never abandoned by God's covenant mercy. Each story shows us that post-victory attacks are real, but they are not final. The enemy strikes hardest in those moments, but God's grace is always stronger, and that's where we find encouragement. If you're facing temptation, fear, or despair right after a win, you're not alone and you're not failing. You're walking the same path as Jesus, Elijah, and generations of God's people before you. The battle after victory is not a sign that God has left you, it's proof that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. If lust keeps holding you back, it's time to fight smarter, not harder. My ebook 7 Biblical Secrets to Destroy Lust Before It Destroys You is linked in the description and pinned comment. Grab your copy today. Have you ever wondered why the enemy doesn't waste time attacking you when you're at your lowest, but seems to strike right after you've stepped into something powerful? That's not coincidence, it's calculated. The enemy knows momentum is dangerous. When you've just experienced a breakthrough, when your faith is on fire, when you're ready to move forward boldly, that's when you're the greatest threat to his agenda. And so the attack isn't random, it's strategic. One of the sharpest tools in his arsenal is distortion. He takes something pure, something God-given, and twists it just enough to poison your perspective. After a spiritual win, pride can creep in. You might start thinking you did it in your own strength, forgetting it was God who carried you. Or on the other side, instead of pride, he plants doubt. Did that really matter? Was that even real? That seed of suspicion grows fast if it isn't pulled out immediately. Another tactic is isolation. After a powerful spiritual experience, it's natural to withdraw and rest. But the enemy capitalizes on that solitude, whispering lies that seem louder when no one else is around. You're more likely to believe the accusations when you're disconnected from community. He knows the danger of unity, so he tries to cut you off before you can strengthen others with your testimony. Discouragement is also one of his go-to weapons. He loves to follow your mountaintop moment with a valley of shadows. Think of Elijah. One moment he's calling down fire from heaven, the next he's running in fear, wishing for death. That wasn't weakness, it was weariness. And the enemy pounced on it. When you're drained, when your emotions are fragile, that's when he convinces you that what you just accomplished doesn't matter, or worse, that it will never last. Then there's temptation, subtle, relentless, and perfectly timed. It doesn't usually come dressed as obvious sin, but as a small compromise, a distraction that seems harmless at first. Right after your biggest victory, he doesn't try to knock you down with something massive. He chips away slowly, hoping you won't notice until you've drifted far enough from where you started. And perhaps the most dangerous of all is the redirection of focus. The enemy knows he can't erase the victory, but he can rob you of its power if he shifts your gaze. Instead of keeping your eyes on God, he pulls your attention back to yourself, your abilities, your fears, your reputation. Suddenly the story is no longer about God's glory, but about your performance. That shift may feel subtle, but it's devastating because pride or fear both have the same effect. They remove God from the center. The frightening part about this strategy is how invisible it can feel in the moment. You don't always see the attack for what it is, you just feel heavy, distracted, or unworthy, but recognizing the pattern is half the battle. Once you see it clearly, you understand that the resistance is not proof of failure, but proof of movement. The enemy wouldn't bother if you weren't advancing. And here's where the hope shines through. The very fact that he's striking at you is evidence that you're carrying something valuable, something dangerous to his kingdom. Every attack is confirmation that what God started in you is real. Once you grasp that, you can stop seeing resistance as punishment and start seeing it as validation. The enemy is calculated, yes, but he's also predictable. He strikes hardest when you've just tasted victory. He whispers loudest when you're tired, and he presses hardest when you're on the edge of growth. Knowing this doesn't make the attack easier, but it does make it clearer. And when you can name the strategy, you can dismantle it. So don't lose heart when the pressure comes after your victory. It's not the end, it's the proof that you've begun something the enemy fears. Stay aware, stay grounded, and you'll turn every attack into another step forward. The moment you step out of a spiritual win, you're standing on dangerous ground. Not because victory is bad, but because victory can make you vulnerable. That's the very reason the enemy waits until you've celebrated to strike. The question isn't if he'll try, it's whether you'll be ready when he does. And readiness doesn't happen by accident, it's intentional. The first safeguard is humility. When something good happens, an answered prayer, a breakthrough, a fresh season of faith, it's tempting to believe you made it happen through your own strength. Pride whispers, "You've got this now," and that's the exact crack the enemy exploits. But when you deflect the glory back to God, you close the door on that attack. Gratitude and humility are like armor for your soul. They remind you that every victory is borrowed strength, not self-made power. Another protection is vigilance. After a win, the natural instinct is to relax, to let down your guard. And while rest is essential, spiritual carelessness is costly. Think of a soldier. Even after the battle is over, he doesn't throw down his shield in enemy territory. He stays alert, scanning for danger. In the same way, prayer and watchfulness are not just for seasons of struggle, they're for seasons of success too. The very habits that carried you to victory are the ones that will keep you standing after it. But vigilance isn't enough without renewal. Too many people try to run on yesterday's strength. After a spiritual breakthrough, exhaustion often sets in. You've poured out, fasted, prayed, pressed through, and now your spirit is tired. That fatigue is a perfect breeding ground for temptation. This is why renewal matters. Feed your soul with scripture, not scraps. Surround yourself with voices that lift you up, not drag you down. Rest doesn't mean laziness. It means recharging in God's presence so you're equipped for the next round. And let's not overlook the power of community. Isolation is one of Satan's favorite weapons. He loves to corner believers when they're alone, whispering lies they'd never believe if someone else were there to call them out. That's why accountability, fellowship, and godly relationships aren't optional. They're lifelines. The people you surround yourself with determine whether you rise stronger after a win or collapse under the weight of attack. Most importantly, remember that guarding yourself isn't about living in fear of the enemy. It's about living with confidence in God. The goal is not to tiptoe through life worried about when the next strike will come. The goal is to be so anchored in truth, so grounded in prayer, so fueled by God's word that when the strike does come, you're not shaken, you're unshakable. When you choose humility over pride, vigilance over carelessness, renewal over exhaustion, and community over isolation, you strip away the enemy's foothold. You're no longer an easy target, you become a fortified one. And the beauty of it all, every time you guard yourself and stand firm, you turn the enemy's weapon back on him. What he meant for harm becomes another testimony of God's strength in your life. So if you've been blindsided after a victory, don't let shame or discouragement convince you that you failed. See it for what it is, a sign that you're dangerous to the kingdom of darkness. Guard yourself wisely, and instead of being weakened by the strike, you'll find yourself growing stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted in the God who never loses a battle. You've seen it, maybe even lived it. The strange tension of standing on the mountaintop one moment and feeling the weight of attack the next. And in that tension, you probably asked yourself, why now? Why does it feel like the enemy comes hardest when I should be celebrating the most? The truth is that timing isn't random, it's intentional. Victories reveal your strength in God, and they expose you as a threat to the kingdom of darkness. That's why the attacks feel so sharp in those moments. But here's what you need to hold on to. If the enemy is striking, it means your life is pushing back against his agenda. You're not failing, you're fighting on the right battlefield. Think about the bigger picture. Every setback after a win isn't meant to erase the victory. It's meant to test whether you'll cling to it or let it slip away. The moments that feel like ambushes are actually opportunities to dig deeper, to solidify your faith, and to prove that what God started in you cannot be stolen. These are the times that separate shallow faith from unshakable faith. And the way you respond here defines not just your survival, but your growth. That's why I want you to stop seeing the enemy's strike as a sign of weakness and start seeing it as a sign of progress. He doesn't waste his energy on people who pose no threat. If he's hitting hard after your victories, it means your life is shaking the gates of hell. And that should change the way you look at every battle. Instead of saying, why me? Start saying, of course me. I'm moving in the right direction. That shift alone takes the sting out of the attack and turns it into fuel for your next step forward. But here's the challenge. Too many people fight these battles alone, unprepared, and eventually worn down. They let exhaustion creep in. They let temptation take root. And they let isolation silence them. The enemy thrives in that silence. He loves when you're too ashamed to speak, too tired to pray, or too distracted to notice the trap being set in front of you. And one of the biggest traps he uses over and over again is lust. It's subtle, it's powerful, and it's one of the quickest ways he pulls people down after their highest spiritual moments. That's why I put together something I believe will change the way you fight. It's not theory, it's not fluff, it's real biblical strategy. My ebook, 7 Biblical Secrets to Destroy Lust Before It Destroys You, is designed to give you practical weapons you can use every single day to guard your heart, protect your mind, and walk in freedom. These aren't just ideas, they're battle-tested truths straight from Scripture that show you how to stand strong when the attacks come. So here's my challenge to you. Don't wait until the next strike leaves you drained and defeated. Arm yourself now. Take the wisdom God has already given and put it to work in your life. The link is right there in the description. Go grab your copy today. Let it be your next step in building the kind of resilience that not only survives the enemy's attacks but thrives in spite of them. Because in the end, the goal isn't just to win one battle. It's to live a life where every strike from the enemy only proves one thing, that you belong to a God who never loses.